The first time I ever sat in a room where the zero draft of a policy was being reviewed, I was excited. I mean, this was me, this young lady representing the voices of youth out there. In that room, I sat amongst various stakeholders, major stakeholders that were there. There was this young lady who had been sent to represent over 60% of Nigeria's population, the youth, to ensure that our voices were being heard. When the review started, the language changed. I saw that conversations that were being had were flying over my head. I saw that I was not being included in that conversation. I watched, I listened, I tried to contribute. And then someone looked at me and said, "We've already passed that section." And then they moved on. At the end of the section, at the end of the review, I realized that we, the youth, who the policy actually affects the most, nothing had been discussed about us. And this was something that was going to affect the entire population. This was something that was meant for everybody in Nigeria. And like I said, we represent 60% of that population. And that day taught me something that has stayed with me. Because we were in the room. We had the access. In fact, they ticked our name. However, we saw that access that falls short of agency is not access. We were included, but the power was not redistributed to us. That was the first thing that I noticed. And it has shaped how we approach inclusion in Nigeria, from national policy making to global spaces. We see that, yes, there are these people in the room, but it has become a tick box exercise. We see that, yes, they are present. However, inclusion is not about presence. Inclusion without power is not inclusion. So as I've gone on to sit in more rooms like that, I have learned how to ask very important and hard questions. Number one, whose voice is being heard when the door closes? Number two, whose priorities are actually included at the end of that policy? And number three, who is there, not just for the optics? In my day-to-day job, I train women on digital skills, teaching them how to grow their business on the internet and increase their income. Now, there was a training that we were having in the northern part of Nigeria where we had gathered women together, and we had seen that, after all of our pre-assessments, after all of the needs assessment that we had done, this was something that they needed. So we started with our digital and financial literacy training. On the second day of that training, we had some men coming and they asked, "What about us? I mean, what about the men?" And what struck me in that moment was that while we had had really good intentions, while we had seen that, yes, women who are the most digitally excluded needed this particular training, we had unintentionally excluded another segment of people. And another thing that struck me was that that's another way inclusion can turn into exclusion. Because while we're including a particular set of people, you just might be excluding another set. Now, one thing that we need to know is that we celebrate inclusion like that's the goal, but it's not it. A seat at the table doesn't automatically mean access or power. Just because our name is on the attendance list doesn't mean anything. Just because you see a picture on social media or online and it shows that everybody is there doesn't mean everybody's voices were actually heard. So I have realized that in spaces where everybody's intention, everybody's voice is not being listened to, then it's difficult, very difficult to say that inclusion has actually happened. I have been in rooms where women, youth, and underserved communities are brought in to show progress. However, you would see that their voices are not being heard. At the end of the day, every decision making that has happened behind closed, in fact, another closed door besides the closed door we were in before. And we see that it is the same power dynamics that is happening over and over and over again. So I ask other questions, not just about who has been invited, but whose voice has actually shaped the decision that has been made. The Coalition of Youth Networks that I lead, we're working with an international agency who was working on a project for youth, and they had invited us for a meeting. They had said, come in, you're the youth. And we came. We were ready. We had prepared. Oh my God. We were dressed in purples besides our clothing. And then we sat down and the event began. It progressed. And we realized we were not there to say anything. We had not been invited into the room in order to contribute. We had not been invited, not even to say hi to the camera, nothing like that. So throughout that particular event, we were silent, we were quiet, and it was very painful. Why? We didn't want the spotlight on us. We didn't want the attention on us. However, we needed to ensure that our voices were part of what was framing what was being done, because the project had been developed to empower youth. However, we were in the room. How are we being empowered if our voices are being silenced? It's a question you need to ask yourself. Now, at the end of the day, what I have seen is that multilateralism at its core is about shared ownership. You have to look at yourself and think, how do we work together to ensure that everyone is included? I have been in a lot more rooms on national consultations, regional discussions, and multilateral fora. And over again, I see that even the spaces that speak about equity are still excluding particular voices. In my work with the Youth Sounding Board in Nigeria, I have seen how youth participation, meaningful youth participation can actually be done. However, sometimes we still have to go behind the doors and insist that our voices be heard. So irrespective of spaces that I have been in, I have seen that over and over and over again, sometimes while we're in the room, while we have the access, we do not necessarily have the power. Because a lot of times, inclusion has been mistaken for presence. And then you think to yourself, what is the point at the end of the day if I am only seated at the table and the decisions that are being made do not even consider me in them? Think about it. The final thing I would like to say today is that inclusion has become a buzzword. We print it on our banners, we write it in our social media posts, we use it in our hashtags, and we think about, oh yes, we're doing inclusion. I mean, there's now a corporate term for it, DEI, diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. However, how can you say you have included when you do not give people the power? So once again, I say, inclusion without power is not inclusion. Thank you very much.